And that's the part you're handling?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so for anybody watching us on Google+, we are talking to Kevin Roberts right now about ADHD, and we're just getting started here, so if you'll be patient with us for just a second, we will get to the questions that we have. In the meantime, if you want to ask us a question, you can go to freak.com, and you can leave a question for us there. And in a second here, Pat Anstett is going to be working with us, sitting down and talking to Kevin. Okay.
So we are on the air. Alan probably sitting. Is that okay if he sits back there, or would you rather have him on the side?
Whatever you like. Whatever you like.
All right, Alan, you're good to go.
Okay. All right. So why don't you just get that started, and I'll bring the questions over in just a second.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. I'm Pat Anstett. I'm a medical writer at the Detroit Free Press, and I have a long-time interest in ADHD. I'm here today to talk with Kevin Roberts, whom I found to be one of the most terrific local resources in Metro Detroit on this subject. He has ADHD. He's an author on the topic and a new book, which is Movers, Dreamers, and Risk Takers, Unlocking the Power of ADHD. And he's an ADHD coach who's developed extensive resources for kids in this area. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, Pat, thank you. And once again, let me offer my gratitude for your continued efforts to spread the word about ADHD and how people can get the support and resources they need. You've been a great friend to the ADHD community, and I really appreciate it.
Well, those disorganized people I love so much are worth it because they brought a lot of happiness into my life. I think we should start, Kevin, by defining what is ADHD, because I found that people get kind of confused about what it is. Can you help us there?
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, it's a syndrome. It's a set of behaviors. And it's a set of behaviors that has two symptom clusters. There's an impulsivity, hyperactivity cluster, and then there's an inattentive cluster. And I'm just going to talk to my assistant, but you can't type while we're on the air because it'll come through. So there are these two symptom clusters, and when people in each cluster exhibit 6 symptoms in one or both clusters, they are said to be ADHD. Now, because there's so much information out there and people regularly say, I had an ADHD moment, you can kind of guess what some of those symptoms are. Difficulty waiting one's turn, blurting out answers, distractibility, has trouble reining in impulses, it talks too much, appears as if driven by a motor, which is what I got. I was called the Tasmanian Devil in first grade, and I loved that. So if you want to find out if you're ADHD, you need to get evaluated and see, do you rise to that 6 symptom level? And there's a lot of people that have 2, 3, or 4 and may look ADHD, but they may not rise to the level of psychiatric diagnosis.
Okay, so that said, let's also explain that this is a diagnosis for a lifetime, right? It's not something you get rid of or something you just have as a kid.
Well, it depends. And, the research suggests that a certain significant percentage of people have symptoms that last lifelong. Some people experience improvement. So ADHD symptoms, however, derive and are correlated with differences in the brain. I'll share a real interesting one that I think illustrates the problem. There's a part of the brain called the caudate, and the caudate is associated with impulsivity. So when children who get in a car accident, who had no history of impulsivity, get damage to the caudate, they start to exhibit impulsivity. And there are also several studies that show that irregularities in the shape of the caudate correlate with ADHD in boys, especially impulsive boys. So the reason I like to use that example is because it shows that there are distinct and measurable differences in the ADHD brain that can start to create a picture that this condition is about your genes, the way your brain is structured.
So given that, people need to better understand this diagnosis and all that comes with it. And one of the themes of your book is that people with this disorder are too often on the receiving end of all kinds of negative comments.
Yep.
And one of your big points is we need to turn that around. How do you do that?
Well, I think the first thing, and it's something related to what we're doing here, is information. To put accurate information out to the general public so that the general public, especially teachers, especially families who have an ADHD, that they understand that this isn't about laziness, this isn't about having a particularly willful child, this is about somebody who has a condition that correlates to differences in size, shape, structure, and functioning of his or her brain. So we need to understand that it is a brain condition. It's not, because what's the armchair wisdom? People will say things like, well, if you would just make him do his homework when he came home from school, right when he came home, all your problems would be solved. If you could just get him to write in his planner, parents try. Parents try over and over again. And so the important thing to create a good mindset is to realize that ADHD is a condition that derives from differences in the brain, and multiple studies support this. So then instead of yelling at the person, you go at it with understanding and compassion.
Okay. Let me ask one more thing before we get to a few reader email questions. You told me a lot of grandparents have contacted you just in the last couple of days since we did a story Sunday on ADHD, which people can find at freep.com. If you're one step removed, if you're a grandparent who doesn't have custody of children, isn't it kind of delicate, and how can you broach that subject with your kids about your grandchildren?
Well, I've always thought that one of the great duties of grandparents was to make the grandchild feel special, and to feel that my grandma made me feel like I was okay. Anything I did was okay, and I never felt judged or admonished by her for my being. So I think this is great that grandparents are getting involved, because I think grandparents want to understand this condition so they can bless their grandchildren, so they can help make their grandchildren feel good about themselves. And I think that's a significant part of the grandparents' role. So I'm just thrilled that so many grandparents have been calling me. Pat, I'm losing the sound there. There we go.
Can you hear me now? All right. Someone who sent in an email,
yes, ma'am.
Twin Street, says, is it a way I can deal with this issue without, is there a way I can deal with this without medication? Never taken medicine a day in my life. I get bored and distracted easily. I daydream a lot. I thrive on calamity. Weird, but I love crisis. I need help. What help do you have for Twin Street?
Well, what a perceptive email, and this individual obviously has a lot of self-understanding. And that penchant for crisis is exactly related to the ADHD brain. Because the ADHD brain, we start from a position of lower overall brain activity for normal, routine, mundane situations. But what happens is, crisis, all of a sudden our brains turn on, and we like that. And we like the intensity. We don't like feeling, that dullness, that boredom that comes from the normal, mundane routines and rhythms of life. So the one thing that you have to ask yourself in this case is, are you creating intensity negatively, or are you creating intensity positively? And what I would say is that if you're creating it negatively, that's going to impact your relationships. And if you're in a marriage, it's going to mess up your marriage. It's going to have a negative impact on your relationship with your kids. So it's important to get that under control. This is a great person who understands him or herself, but now this person has to go to the next level and find some ways to create positive intensity. And not knowing that person, I wouldn't want to comment on the specifics, but if we get another email, I'd be happy to go into that, because that's a really tricky thing. How do if I've spent my whole life being negative, how can I create that intensity positively?
Okay. Jonathan Lund asks, in regards to adults with ADHD, what's your advice if a diagnosis of depression and ADHD are apparent? Can medicines be combined? And then he says, I don't care for the side effects of Lexapro. Also, does generic Adderall wear off over time? What's your advice to prevent a plateau? Well, there's a few questions for you.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to comment on psychiatric medications because I don't want a lawsuit on my hands. I've got a lot of opinions about medication, but I think that it would be a couple things. If you're taking Lexapro and you don't like the side effects and they haven't improved significantly, go to your doctor. Make sure that you're not just, in a case where you've got ADHD and depression, which are conditions that I've dealt with, both of which I've dealt with, I would make sure that you're going to a psychiatrist who has an understanding of these, because it's very tricky to treat ADHD when you've got anxiety and when you've got depression. So you're going to need somebody who's very, very skilled. And I would be happy to if that person emails me, I would be happy. By the way, this phone is ringing because of the free press. Buddy, would you put that out in the hall for me? So I think it's important to work with your doctor to make sure you've got someone who understands both conditions and that you're addressing both conditions in a unified medication program.
Okay.
Now let me go to the depression because there's a big word here called comorbidity, and ADHD has a lot of comorbidities. There are a lot of ADHDers who have depression, anxiety, oppositional defiant disorder, a variety of things. So
substance abuse, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, substance abuse. And one of the big ones, Pat, that I'm particularly plugged into is cyber addictions, internet-based addictions. That's the new big addiction for ADHDers. And I can tell you, I get calls from all over the country because if boredom is your problem, well, just sit in front of the computer. You can always find something to do. It may not be productive. It may not help you move your life forward, but it will allay the boredom for a period of time. So we got to be really careful with that. I've seen lives wasted in front of a computer screen.
Was yours wasted from cyber addiction?
Well, it depends how you define wasted. If 14,000 hours in front of a computer screen playing games over 10 years qualifies as wasted, then I am guilty as charged.
Did you get very little done in those 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I had a job and I was working my job and stuff, but I didn't, my dreams, doing public speaking, like giving seminars and conferences, I did nothing to move those dreams forward. And ironic, go ahead.
What worked for you? How did you curb your own cyber addiction?
I just got really disgusted with not having, my goals, not achieving my goals. I mean, disgust is a great motivator for ADHD people. And that's kind of what got me. I was just like, I just got to a point. I had friends tell me, you're a really smart guy. We thought, people would tell me, we thought you were going to be a congressman. We thought you'd have your own TV show. We thought you'd be a writer. And these people would tell me that. And I just started to feel bad. I'm like, God, I guess I really haven't done anything with my life. And at some point, it just became a point of disgust and cognitive dissonance where I realized, I got to do something different because this isn't making me happy.
So if you have a child who's a heavy video game user, an internet surfer, whatever, hours and hours of time on this, your advice is what?
Well, first of all, whenever we're dealing with these cyber addictions, think of the iceberg effect. The cyber addiction is the tip of the iceberg, and there's probably something going on underneath there. I get calls from all over the place. A lot of times people will call me and I'll say, have you had ADHD evaluated? Then we find out they're ADHD. I find a lot of people that get heavily plugged into these fantasy games. I've gotten dozens of calls where I've suggested a psychological evaluation, and then the person has gone on to be diagnosed as bipolar. A lot of anxiety and a lot of depression are found in people who become excessive and addictive users of the cyber world. So it's important when you see that behavior that you don't look at it in a vacuum. It's part of a larger behavioral profile.
Okay. I want to move to a couple questions and just combine them from people who ask, where can they find resources for ADHD, like the day camps and the study groups, if they don't live in Oakland County, and if they live outside of Michigan? What help is there, or what help can you give them finding those resources?
Well, first of all, I would go to chadd.org, CHADD, chadd.org. That's a wonderful organization. I'm a member of CHADD. I often speak at their conferences. I would strongly recommend that group. Most larger communities have a CHADD organization. And the people who are in CHADD are usually very adept at steering people towards appropriate resources in the community. Secondly, people can go to my website, kevinjroberts.net, kevinjroberts.net, and I would be happy to help people in other communities put on camps and do some of these things here that we're already doing. And as far as the study groups, yeah, if you don't live in the Tri-County area of Detroit, one of my goals and missions is to train other people to do study groups in other areas. And that's something that I've got a 100-page manual for that. So that's something I'm going to be doing. So if people are in different areas and they're not finding resources, feel free to contact me through my website, and definitely go to chadd.org.
Yeah, and I think I've learned from you to be creative, that you do, for example, some consultations with people as far away as Iceland.
Yep.
By Skype.
Yeah, I do.
So maybe there are some creative solutions, even if you don't have the best person right in your own hometown.
Right, and let's take the organization, the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Most major metro areas have a Boys and Girls Club. That was an organization that changed my life. Let's say, you live near a high school. There are always junior and senior good students who are juniors and seniors who are in the National Honor Society, and they always need community service credits. Get one of those kids over to mentor and tutor your ADHD loved one.
Yeah. And I think that's a great piece of advice, because parents struggle over homework. It becomes a big turf and battleground.
Yep.
And your advice is, let someone else pick up there.
Yeah,
Find someone to help your kid with schoolwork. Stop doing it yourself, because you're just hitting your head in the wall.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can do it and it's working well, fine. But if you're finding that homework is the greatest source of domestic conflict, find a way to reduce that conflict. And you may need to get help. You may need to get support. I mean, the trouble with ADHD is that we don't always learn the same way other people do. So you may tell us things 3 times, and I'll say, oh, yeah, Mom. Oh, Mom, I'm going to definitely do it this time. And then I forget to do it. You may find that I'm doing my homework, there's a call, and I take the call, and then I forget to go back to do my homework. That's called poor working memory, and that's one of the deficits in attention deficit disorder. So these are things that are driven in the brain, and it's derived from the brain, and it's really hard as a parent to tell your kid something 20 times, and then it still doesn't get done reliably. So you have to find creative ways of making sure those things get done, and making sure those things get done without you getting into a really negative mindset that's going to damage your relationship. Remember what Chapter 3 of my book is called, The World is Falling Apart. And that describes the mindset of many ADHD parents.
Okay. Victoria Shea emails us with this question. Do you have any focusing exercises to suggest, either physical or otherwise?
Well, that's a great question, Victoria, and thank you. First of all, let's take something concrete. Let's take math. And one of my problems with math is that I see the big picture, but I miss the little details. So one of the things that I do is when I get to a problem, I ask myself, where am I likely to make a mistake? And then I hold my breath. and I do the problem while I'm holding my breath. Then I let my breath out, and then I go to the next problem, and I keep doing that over and over. My breath control, by the way, is really good, and I've got great lungs now. But that's just a little simple thing, and a lot of the kids that I work with who have trouble focusing on math, when they hold their breath, they can do it better. It's almost like you got to give the ADHD brain something else to do while it's supposed to be doing another task, and then we're okay. Another thing that I do is I do meditation. I do mindfulness meditation, and I've been doing that for 18 years, and really the last 10 years heavily, and I do it every day, and that really helps me, because what the meditation does, I don't know if it allows me to focus better, but it gives me metacognition where I can watch myself better, and I can see what's happening within me, and then I can take steps to get the focus back. Now, look, I'm a writer. You're a writer. I get writer's block. What do I do when I get writer's block? I do abdominal crunches. I take a walk. I talk on the phone and take a walk. That's a particularly potent activity for me. I take a walk while on the phone. It sort of speeds things up in my brain, gets me past those blocks. I find exercise to be particularly potent. Also, just simply having a coach to talk to, the anticipation of knowing, oh my God, it's Tuesday, it's Wednesday, I'm going to have to talk to my coach at 9 p.m. tonight. I better get to work. Something, just that simple. But there are dozens and dozens and dozens of ways. Here's another great way. If you have a smartphone, set reminders on your smartphone. How's your focus? Set that reminder randomly throughout the day. There's another thing called Watchminder. Watchminder is designed specifically for people with focus issues. You wear it on your wrist, and there are 60 settings. Are you waiting your turn? Might be one message. You can program what messages it asks you, and the messages go off by a buzz on your wrist.
By the way, while you're talking about messages and text messages, I want to say that you just gave me some advice recently that since these ADHDers are so internet savvy and video and text savvy, text your ADHDer with a request.
That's right.
Instead of asking.
Right.
And I have done that, and it works.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, people say, oh, well, that's not a very good idea, and then they do it and it works. I don't know exactly why it works, but there's something about ADHDers where we get talked at so much that we develop these defense mechanisms to tune people out, but the text, we're plugged into that. So it almost bypasses our insecurities, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You need me down dinner now?
I want all the people listening to know I've gotten housework done twice by people I live with by texting them. I never would have thought that before.
Yeah, well,
What a concept.
And, when you're asking loved ones, children, spouse to do household chores, it's real easy to be like, come on, I told you, can't you just get up and be productive? Oh, my God. I sound like Bart Simpson's aunt a little bit, I realize, But that's the thing, we can get into that naggy place, and if you nag an ADHDer, it's not going to be good.
Okay, let's move on with a few other questions. Stephanie Tabor Cole asks, we're just starting the process with my son. School is concerned that his attention is not there because he has a hard time concentrating, gets distracted very easily. I wanted to start something over the summer before school starts, but so far we will be on our second appointment with the doctor and has not suggested anything yet. I'd love to get him in a program with Boys Empowered, but can't afford the cost. Do you have scholarships? Do you have any other advice?
We do have
how to do some work at home.
We do have some scholarships, and in the case of that young man, I would certainly, depending on where she lives, I would certainly encourage Stephanie to go to the Boys and Girls Club, to go to the local high school. One great method, I'm going to do a shameless plug for my book. My book is $11 on Amazon. It's chock full of ideas of how to work with your ADHD loved one. As far as the camps go, we do have some scholarship available, so contact us. We very well could work something out. We don't like money to be the reason people don't do the camps.
Okay. We have a question about girls from Ashley Maybit of Sterling Heights.
Mhm.
She has a 10-year-old daughter diagnosed with ADHD inattentive when she was 7. Since then, she's been on increasing levels of Concerta, which have helped her at school. On the flip side, they don't like the lack of spark and personality when she's on medicines. She sometimes appears indifferent and sad. And while I believe medicine is important for academic performance, I don't like these other side effects. How do ADHD meds impact girls physically and emotionally as they approach adolescence? What are the specific resources for girls?
Well, first of all, it's a great question because there are gender differences in how ADHD shows up. Girls are less likely to be diagnosed because girls tend to be much more sensitive to social cues. So they're not doing the kind of things that get the teacher to notice them. In terms of medication, I think this is a good time to talk about what medication does. We don't exactly know, but we have some suspicions. And, so in ADHD, the frontal dopamine networks, which are involved in learning and reward, and the norepinephrine networks, which are involved in learning and memory as well, and other things, fight and flight, these don't function optimally, these networks. And it involves, the neurotransmitters and, neurotransmitters getting across the synapse and so to allow a nerve impulse to get off the synapse. What ADHD stimulants do is they are essentially dopamine reuptake inhibitors. So they increase the bioavailability of dopamine in the synapse. And so if you look at the flip side of that, if that's what it's doing to help, then when you have a person with ADHD, you have a person whose frontal dopamine networks are not working well, and that makes certain aspects of life challenging. So if you're having unpleasant side effects with Concerta, that may not be the right med for you, but I will give the same advice I gave to the person who wanted to talk about depression. Make sure you're with a psychiatrist who has a specialty in ADHD in children. Make sure you're dealing with somebody that has a lot of experience and has a specialty in that area. Just because your child is on Concerta now, that doesn't mean that's ultimately the right med, and sometimes throughout the lifespan we need to change our meds. The research, however, suggests that the people that get the most out of treatment are those that get medication plus the social and behavioral interventions. And what we're doing at the camp are social and behavioral interventions, and that's what you do in therapy.
Can girls come to the study groups and camps that you offer in some of the other programs?
Yes, we have Girls Empowered that we have Girls Empowered groups where we can send girls. As far as the ADHD camps for kids, we don't have girls camps specifically. We offered them before, but we didn't get enough girls signing up. Now we're working on that. We're definitely working on that.
All right, Sally Hart of Waterford says, I teach a sewing class at a local fabric store. I have kids who do not try or get really frustrated and into meltdowns, sometimes when things do not go perfectly. They will sit and stare at the sewing machine with downcast eyes and mumble, I don't know. Parents present the excuse that the child has ADHD. I am now going to go back trying to get them to reason out the next step after 2 tries and just re-demonstrate what to do. Is that correct? I want them to have fun, but at the same time learn how to do it on their own. They're age 8 and up.
Well, first of all, the correct response is going to depend a lot on the individual, and that's another point of ADHD. ADHD is not one condition. It's a lot of different there's a lot of different ways that it shows up. But the one thing I would do is, ADHD kids get a lot of negativity directed their way, and so part of that is they can become perfectionists. They don't want to do anything unless it's perfect because then they won't get yelled at. And I've seen, especially with girls, a lot of girls do this, not as much in the boys. So I would create an environment where it's okay to make mistakes and that it's expected to make mistakes. And you might want to say, well, your mistake quota is 3 for the day. Have you filled up your mistake quota? Because that's how we learn. We learn from our mistakes. If you create an atmosphere where mistakes are, almost encouraged and you have fun with it. Talking about the meltdown, one of the things we do at the friendship camp is we have these little placards, and we randomly assign the placards to different boys. And these placards have negative behavioral traits. So one placard is Meltdown Man. So if you're a boy and you get Meltdown Man on you, you have to have meltdowns. That's your job, and you get rewarded with friendship tokens depending on how good you do your Meltdown Man job. And then we have discussion. How do you think he did on Meltdown Man? Does anybody do anything differently when they have meltdowns? And then it's kind of like a director talking to his actors. Well, show us, what do you think a good meltdown looks like? And so that's what I talk about in the book. We're flipping it. We're doing the opposite. Oh, you want kids to behave? Well, then help them consciously put on those behaviors so they can have some metacognition and take responsibility for them.
And I think what I've heard you say before is try to help the child identify what their breaking point is and what options they have when they get there. Right? And we want people, too, one of the things you encourage are breaks or getting a little snack or something. This sewing instructor says that doesn't always work for her. Anything else before we move on to another?
I think that with meltdowns, especially with ADHDers, trying to talk and reason close to the incident is often a very bad idea. Because if we talk about meltdown, what we really mean is that emotional regulation, the ability of that child to regulate his or her emotions, is atypical. It's not developed along the typical model that we expect it to. And what that has to do with, that's partly, again, those those prefrontal dopamine networks, those are responsible for a lot of that stuff. And it's a much more complicated picture, but that's the short version.
Okay. Alexander Nestoiter, if I'm mispronouncing, I apologize, has a very precise question. I don't know if you can answer it, but let's try. What is the current status of treatments using vestibular stimulation through balance-related activities? Do you know where that?
Well, there are a lot of people who are touting this. This is the panacea du jour. And there are not a lot of studies on it, but there are people working on this. This is the idea that part of the brain that controls balance functions atypically in ADHDers, and if we work on balance, then we can also see a reduction in ADHD symptoms. There's going to need to be a lot more studies on that. But, it's got that quality that people seem to like, well, it's been in front of our noses all the time. Look how easy this is. Just be careful when you're, latching on or clinging to a new idea out there. It's just like the biofeedback stuff. Everybody was saying the biofeedback was, going to cure ADHD. Well, it did help some of the symptoms in some people. Now, they can't determine which type of people it helps yet. Number one. Number two, when people stop doing it, the benefits fade. So be really careful when you're looking up cures for ADHD, because there's a whole group of quacks out there. There's a whole group of people who think that they have the answer. Just be really careful whenever you hear that.
Okay. Some people think that too much is made by the medical community of ADHD, that they jump quickly at a diagnosis. Do people get misdiagnosed?
Well, that's a really excellent question. And I think it actually goes to something that's very important, and that's differential diagnosis. There are a lot of conditions that can actually look like ADHD in some of the forms, especially in the forms that they show up in school, that aren't ADHD at all. Bipolar, for instance, if you have a teenager who's starting, along the path of bipolar disorder, and you give that person ADHD medications, it can make the bipolar disorder worse. Sometimes hearing disorders, children who are sitting in school and they have hearing disorders, and that is the ultimate culprit. They are talked about as distracted, not paying attention, but there's an underlying physical cause with that. So a good ADHD clinician will do some, at least a few batteries to test out some of these things. When you get tested for ADHD, you have to make sure that you go to a clinician who is adept in differential diagnosis, because there are a lot of things, at least a dozen, where ADHD is frequently misdiagnosed. However, I think the biggest problem is that ADHD is actually undertreated, that there's a lot of people out there who are not getting proper treatment. They're just getting medication treatment, or they're just getting therapy. They're not getting both when it's appropriate. I think ADHD is still undertreated. Does that mean, and there are parents who want to give their child every edge, and they almost demand that the doctor give them, those stimulant medications. That does happen, especially, in Oakland County. I've seen it many times. But I still think it's a problem that needs to be further addressed, that there are a lot more people that have this condition that don't know it.
Okay. If I can, I'd like to ask a few questions of my own that
Sure.
might go to some general questions people
Sure.
have. I remember back in elementary school, people telling us, put the kid in the front of the class if he's distracted. Make him sit right there in the front. Then we'll know if he's daydreaming or not. Does that work?
Well, it can, but what's I like that was a very good impression that you did, and I think what that type of wisdom derives from is that there's a simple solution, and there usually aren't many simple solutions for ADHD. But certainly, you can play around with Bobby doesn't do well when he's with Timmy, so you move him away from Timmy. You move him toward the front of the room. You reward him for doing things while he's at the front of the room, and by 7th period he gets to go to the back of the room, whatever. I mean, you can play around with lots of things. One of the problems with ADHD children that this touches on is ADHD is a lot about reward. If I'm sitting in a desk and I'm paying attention and I'm doing what I'm supposed to, the reward is that long term I'm going to get good grades and I'm going to curry favor with the teacher, and then my parents are going to be proud of me. Well, if I don't have ADHD, those things will probably motivate me to behave according to expectations. But in ADHD, long-term rewards don't work. ADHDers will almost always choose an immediate short-term reward over a much larger long-term reward. And so it's important that we understand that quick fixes, easy fixes usually are not going to solve the problem.
Okay. There are a lot of traits of ADHD that people who live with them don't particularly like. My least favorite is procrastination. Boy, I hate procrastination.
Right.
I still haven't tackled that one, Kevin. What kind of advice do you have for people dealing with ADHD-er who procrastinates about everything?
Well, if you look at if you view ADHD as the condition of lower baseline activity in the brain for repetitive, boring, mundane tasks, procrastination is a way of creating a crisis so that the activity in the brain goes up, and then that person has the requisite amount of brain activity to do the task at hand. ADHD, now look, even as I say that, there are ADHDers who are good at plotting and who do not procrastinate. But by and large, ADHDers do procrastinate. And if you want that person to not procrastinate, you're going to have to find a way for him or her to create intensity rather than wait till the night before or 2 nights before. And it's important to have a frank discussion that, procrastination serves a useful purpose. It helps get the brain stimulated, and maybe begin the discussions like, well, how can we get your brain stimulated so that you start earlier, so that you have some time to edit that English paper, so instead of getting a B+, you get the A. How can we create that intensity sooner? And Pat, I'm 43 and I still procrastinate.
I bet you do.
And
so what's your tip for yourself? What do you do?
I'm 43, so I've developed some self-awareness where I know when I'm really up the creek. Like the problem when I was younger is I'd think I wasn't up the creek when I actually was, in terms of like I needed to start it now to get a good paper, but I would misjudge that. So procrastination is okay as long as you're aware of your propensity to misjudge, and that you put some work into judging when you're actually up the creek and when you actually need to start.
Yeah. One of my favorite ADHDers swears by little 3x5 index cards with a list of things to do for every day, and he checks them off.
Yep, checklists
Often
can be
those are the
very
things
beneficial.
he procrastinates about. And it works for him.
Yeah.
So whatever works.
Yeah, I mean, and I use my phone, and I have a checklist thing on my phone. I touch it, it's done, and then I keep looking at that. I love looking at it. Even if I know exactly what's checked off, there's something about, looking at it on my phone. Oh, I got all those things done. Well, that's good. And then it kind of helps fire me forward, in my day. Just the idea of checking things off, knowing that I got a bunch of things done helps propel me into a greater productivity.
Okay. We're going to wrap up with a few more questions.
Okay.
Jewel is getting us a few more here. But in the meantime, I guess I just want to ask about the tips you might have dealing with some of the most irritating behaviors. One of the things you said in your book, I just laughed out loud when I read this. These ADHDers don't flush the toilet. What is that about?
I don't know. Well, I guess they like to save water. We're very conservation-minded.
Are you in this camp too? Or did you fix this?
I've been advised by my attorney to not answer that. But let me say, I do believe in saving water. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but yeah, we are bad at it. And I've had a lot of mothers for whom that was the biggest issue.
Get over it.
Yeah.
That's what I'd say.
Well, I had that attitude, and then she read me the riot act. You don't know. She's going to do that at work, and they're all going to know it's her, and they're going to say that she's dirty, and rah, rah, rah. And she was just, she was incensed that I was downplaying the importance of that. So.
Yep. Holly DiMaggios asks, are there any support groups for parents that have a child with ADHD?
Absolutely. And does she say what area she's from?
I don't have that, no.
There are in the Detroit metro area. There's a Macomb County CHAD, there's 2 Oakland County CHADs, there's a Washtenaw County CHAD, and I believe there's a Wayne County CHAD. Go to chad.org and go to find a group near you, and you'll find it. If she emails me, I'd be happy to steer her in the right direction.
Great. The other couple things we're going to ask here before we close up would be what's ahead in terms of some of the resources you hope to develop in Metro Detroit.
Well, I'm going to develop a training seminar to train people to run ADHD study groups with them.
Great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm excited about that. I've got a lot of interest. Secondly, if you have a cyber junkie in your house, we're going to be doing 3 or 4 cyber junkie day-long adventure boot camps designed to help your loved one break that habit. And you'll be dealing with one of the biggest video game addicts in the Tri-County area in recovery. So we're going to be doing that. So if you've got any trouble with that, please check out my website, and that's going to be coming up. We also have social skills training groups on Saturdays once a month throughout the school year, and we also are doing parent trainings. We're doing retreats. We have family retreats coming up. So please check out my website, and I will send you the information. But yeah, lots of exciting stuff. Because really, Pat, what we're trying to do, and what I am all about, is building ADHD community. Because I think that part of the problem with ADHDers is we end up being marginalized in our communities, and I think stopping that process and reintegrating ADHDers into the wider world is one of the great solutions and one of the things that can pay the greatest benefit.
Right. And one of the things you always tell me, maybe we'll end here, is have fun with your ADHDer.
Well, you know what
Why do you say that?
Well, because we're fun, Pat. Look, I'm behaving myself, and I still can't stop cracking a one-liner. We're not boring. We're intense. We love humor. We love funny voices. We love making good-natured prank phone calls. We love going through the Wendy's drive-thru and using a different voice. So we are fun. We have a way. We don't like routine, so we're always on the lookout for new and interesting things. Isn't that great to have somebody in your life who's always on the lookout for the next new and interesting thing? That just makes life more exciting and more multidimensional.
All right. So I know you're proficient in at least 5 languages. How do you want to say goodbye to our audience here, Kevin?
I'll do it in Quechua. Topay nanches kama. That's the language of the Inca. It's the language of the high Andes. Topay nanches kama.
Gracias. And thank you so much for all your great advice, Kevin.
Well, it's my pleasure, and let me know when you want to do it again. I'm ready and raring to go.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat.